welcome to another episode of Reptile Fight Club. I'm your host, Justin Julander, and with me, as always, Mr. Rob Stone. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Well, I've got COVID, but other than that, I'm doing all right. Recovering and almost back to work, so, you know. But I guess I'd say it's worth it because we had a really nice trip, and one of my siblings brought it with them on the trip, and so we contracted it. So I wasn't sick on the trip, so that was nice. But yeah, I guess I might talk a little bit about the trip because the first couple days were herp
Absolutely.
heavy.
We got to hear this. Yeah.
Oh man. So first off, I have a bone to pick with the tin flipping boys over there. They're flipping tin guys. So I listened to their Florida episode. So I was prepared for like World War III. And, you know, they said somewhere in there that you're not allowed to use lights in the Everglades or flashlights.
Yeah. They were super weirded out. Yeah.
Yeah. And I talked to somebody who was like a general naturalist that on one spot, and he's like, well, no, you can use lights all you want. So I didn't bring any headlamps or anything. And so I had to go to the Walmart and spend $50 on a flashlight. You know, it's like, I didn't want to do this, but yeah. So anyway.
You sure you weren't just nicking it and said, oh yeah, someone else?
No, because I was specifically going to bring them, but I heard those guys say it's not allowed in the Everglades. But then these local naturalists from Florida said, oh yeah, you can do whatever you're fine. And every person we saw out there had a headlamp or a flashlight or something. So I don't know, maybe it's further north that they are strict about that. And we didn't run into any weird people or wildlife officers or anything. It was actually the herpers we did interact with were just young herpers that were enthusiastic and friendly and like helped us, like showed us a couple things that they found, you know. So it was a great experience. So I don't know what you tin flipping guys are talking about, but I had a very pleasant experience in Florida, much different than Rob has experienced, I think too. And but yeah, so we took a red eye, which, you know, has its pros and cons for sure. But so we got there at like 6 a.m. and we couldn't check into our hotel until like 3 or 4. So we just drove straight out to the Everglades, and we were based in Miami, where we were going on a cruise with my family. And so we were in the Miami area, and we wanted to kind of get acclimated a couple days before. And so we were hanging out. So we just drove to the Everglades and went down to the very southern part of Florida through the park, that southern part of the park. And, I mean, during the day, it was mostly birding, and we did do a couple trails, and it just got bit by mosquitoes and other horse flies and stuff. So that wasn't very pleasant, but we did have the forethought to stop off at Walmart and get some bug spray and some other bug spray and sunscreen. So we didn't have to try to bring that with us. So, but yeah, we saw, you know, some really cool birds and some neat stuff. I got a few more lifers on my bird list down there, although I missed a couple really cool ones that you could find down there. But anyway, we get down to Flamingo, where there's this boat ramp that's, you know, pretty good spot for seeing crocodiles. And so there's actually a boat tour that goes out of there to, you know, and you can see crocs on the tour and stuff.
Careful, you might be giving it away.
Oh, I might be. Yeah. But, it's, you know, it's about the,
I mean, there's only a tour industry around it, but you might be giving it away. So.
And I mean, I don't know if you want to go try to catch a croc or something, or, you know, then that's on you, but, but we get to the boat ramp, and in the morning, and we go out to see if we can see any crocs. And I see this like round disc shaped thing coming out of the water, this gray disc thing. And I'm like, is that a ray or some kind of, you know, and it was manatees. There were like a half a dozen manatees swimming around in this little bay, saltwater, you know, bay. And they were going up to this pipe and drinking fresh water out of the pipe. So they were just like 6 feet below us, drinking water. It was so cool. And I'd never seen manatees in the wild. So I was pretty stoked about that.
Yeah,
so we sat and watched those for quite a while. really cool looking little mammals with their tiny eyes and, big old faces and stuff. So it was pretty cool. Kind of sad. All of them all the ones that we saw had like propeller, marks and scars on their backs. One was like pink and, pink in the area where it looks like it got torn up a bit. So, scar tissue and stuff. It was pretty sad. So I guess boat interactions with manatees is pretty common down in that area. So, but so we didn't see any crocs there. So we drove up. We were heading back into town as the day was getting hotter, and we did a little walk around, kind of near a lake, and saw didn't see much. Saw a couple of anoles and other things, but I think we were there a little maybe late in the morning. It was getting pretty hot, and the bugs were ridiculous. It was crazy, but we stopped by at this lake on the way back, and there were these people kind of looking over the edge of the railing, and I'm like, "Oh, you got something good?" And they're like, "Oh, there's a crocodile female over there." And I'm like, "Oh, sweet!" So we got to see our croc, and I was watching, taking pictures. I had my zoom lens, and she was kind of moving her head up out of the water, like onto some trees, or mangrove roots. And I'm like, what is she doing? And I'm zooming in. I see like baby crocodiles moving around. And they're like,
wild.
Yeah, half a dozen little baby crocodiles or more crawling up the roots and stuff. So yeah, it was pretty cool. One kind of jumped in the water and then climbed up on the other side. So I've got a little video of that. It's pretty sweet. So I was very excited. I was geeking out. And then she swam around out of the mangroves and into like open water just right next to the dock. So I'm down there like, maybe 3 feet away from her filming, this crocodile swimming past us along the dock. So it was pretty sweet.
So maybe really go during the day, at least that time of year, because it seems like they're mostly talking about it at night, and then it's sort of, but yeah, that's a great experience.
Yeah, I did not expect that experience. It's very, very exciting and unexpected, but very cool. So that, that started out, that was that would have made the whole trip right there. So
yeah.
But we went and checked into the hotel, drove back, we stopped at that, is it Richard is here or somebody is here fruit stand?
I don't know.
I guess it's this famous spot where, you go and grab a fruit smoothie. They have all these, tropical fruits and things. It's pretty cool stand. We were coming in there when like 500,000 cyclists were coming out. So there was like the whole place was just inundated with cyclists, and they're like ringing out there, like washing their headbands and stuff in the fruit bowls. I'm like, what are you doing? It's horrible. Yeah. Nasty stuff. So, but we, got a couple smoothies and
even after that, little cyclists.
Well, in the backyard too, they have kind of this little mini zoo thing, like petting zoo type thing, but they have a few parrots in cages, and there's like a bunch of sulcata tortoises and iguanas and, cows and goats and emus and things like that. So it's kind of fun to see. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, we went and checked in our hotel, took a nap for a couple hours because we weren't very rested after that red eye flight. And then, although I wasn't too tired. I think Heidi slept a bit on the drive, but I was pretty alert. I guess whenever there's herping involved or the chance of seeing things,
of seeing something.
Yeah. The other disappointment was, I thought there'd be alligators everywhere, because when I'd gone before to the Everglades, we were a bit further north, and, along the road, there were canals, and I was seeing alligators in the canal during the drive to the Everglades. And then in Everglades Park, they were everywhere along the road and, all over the place. I'm like, oh yeah, we're going to see a ton of alligators. And we saw no alligators the first day, on all that driving, I guess 40 or so miles. And then, there and back was closer to 80 miles. And then, we went out that night and, got a bunch of snakes and things. So I saw my corn snake and scarlet snake, a few cottonmouths. It was a great night of herping.
That's awesome.
And then, so we had really, really good time. I forgot to put on the bug spray, and I got out to take a picture of the corn snake. That was the first find of the trip.
Oh, nice.
And all of a sudden I came back in and I had 30 mosquito bites on each arm, just right kind of at the top, where my sleeve ended. And so, yeah, I didn't forget to put on bug spray after that. It was like, God, load up on this stuff. It was terrible. But the bugs were next level ridiculous. But yeah, it was a really good night of herping. And then the next day we drove down the Keys. We went all the way to Key West, and there was a shop. Jordan Parrott recommended stopping by this Bass Pro Shop that had, oh man, now I'm gonna space the name. Old Man in the Sea. Who wrote that book? Hemingway's boat was in this Bass Pro Shop. You could walk on it and scope it out and stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, it was really cool. So we got Old Man in the Sea on Audible, read by Donald Sutherland, and listened to that as we drove down the Keys. So it was pretty cool. And then once we got down to Key West, we stopped at a restaurant, and the Old Man in the Sea kind of revolves around this man catching a big swordfish or sailfish or whatever it was, and so we got swordfish appetizer, like these little fried swordfish bites that were fantastic, and then we ate hogfish. We stopped at this hogfish cafe and had some hogfish. And coincidentally, we spotted a couple hogfish on our snorkeling off the cruise. So that was kind of cool.
Right. But, what's a hogfish? I don't know.
It's this really bizarre looking, it kind of has like an upturned snout. It almost looks like a pig's nose.
Sure.
And then it has these 3 or 4 big spines kind of on the top of it that it can erect when it's like, freaking out or whatever. So cool looking fish. Yeah. Look them up. They're neat looking. And then, other than that, they're not too descriptive. They're kind of a reddish colored and, short fins and stuff, but really weird looking fish. So yeah, it was a really great trip with Heidi. And then on the way back, we saw, 500 iguanas on the side of the road. We did pull off on one road that looked like kind of a nature preserve type area. And we were driving down the road and there was this bright green baby iguana right in the middle of the road. So we stopped and got some pictures of him and a couple of videos, but yeah, it's pretty cool. I tried to grab him, but I wasn't fast enough, and it was very hot. He took off pretty quick, but, so it was fun to kind of spot the iguanas as we're driving back up the Keys, and just crazy how many are out there. And, but they're neat lizards. Even though they're not really supposed to be there, right? They're invasive. They're cool lizards for sure. Seeing a giant lizard in the wild is kind of fun regardless. I feel bad that they're probably not supposed to be there, but what do you do? Besides enjoy them, right?
Yeah.
And so we get back to Miami, and Heidi's like, well, do you want to go out herping again? I'm like, really? You want to go? And so I'm like, let's do it. So we went out there and did another round. And this time they were like, cottonmouths everywhere. We were seeing them all along the roads and stuff. So that was pretty neat. And got one to display, open its mouth, and it was surprisingly difficult. Like the other ones would just kind of run away, and I'm like, no, stop and display for me. I didn't have a snake hook or anything, so I think I got a tree branch and was kind of escorting them off the road or whatever. I think that might be technically illegal, but I'd rather do that than see them get hit by a car, But yeah, we saw a couple more corn snakes, a couple new species of water snake. Wow. Yeah, I think we saw a total of 3 or 4 corn snakes. Maybe.
Yeah, that's one up. Well, maybe 4 up on me. I still have.
Maybe it was just one each night, so maybe only 2. Yeah,
either way,
didn't speak too much, but yeah, it was really cool. And another scarlet snake, but it had been hit by a car. And green water snake. That was kind of a weird looking, different looking species.
That was the one that the Flippin' Tin guys were excited about, right?
Yeah.
Jake's first one, and they get really heavy and big and heavy. I don't know.
Yeah. The 2 we saw were juveniles, so they weren't too impressive yet, but they were neat looking, like weird looking little things, little mini anacondas or something. But and we got back down and looked at the manatees were still there, like hanging out, drinking water at night and stuff. So we kind of checked them out in the night, and then we were heading back, and there were some of these. So on the way down, these young herpers were on the side of the road, and like, oh, did you find something cool? And they're like, yeah, the giant alligator in front of our car. I'm like, oh yeah. So Heidi got to see her alligator, and that was pretty sweet. So we sat and checked it, but it took off pretty quick. Like it jumped in the water soon after we got out and took a look at it, and it took off. But that was really cool. She got really to see it and got excited about that. And then we went down and we were heading back, and we ran into those kids again, the ones that had shown us the alligator. And like, oh, did you check the boat dock for crocodiles? And we're like, no, we didn't make it over. I didn't know if they'd be out or whatever. So we went back, and sure enough, this giant crocodile is just laying on the boat ramp or on the dock, like up above, like, out of the water a few feet. It was pretty cool. That's thing really was cool. Giant. And coincidentally, it was missing part of its lower jaw. And Aspen said, oh, is that one missing part of it? Because I saw one in there that was missing part of its lower jaw. I'm like, yeah, it's got to be the same one. And so it was really cool. And we were pretty close. I mean, you got up pretty close to take pictures of it and stuff. And it was just kind of laying there. It moved, it changed positions and, opened its mouth and stuff. And then there was another one over on the grass, not too far away from that one. And it was really awesome. Cool. So fun stuff. But yeah, really great trip. The cruise was fun. Had a great time with my family and with Heidi, and had some really fun snorkeling out there, and went and drove razors around on Nassau Island, and that was pretty fun. So
no Nassau boas though, hey?
No.
I imagine that where the cruises go.
Yeah. And we were there during the heat of the day. They drop you off kind of like at 9:00 in the morning, and then I guess if I thought I could have got my whole, all 10 of us to go out herping, I might have suggested it, but I didn't think that would fly. So maybe next time.
Right.
Yeah. So
that's
good
awesome.
Times.
And then because it's, a cruise, I understand you didn't get it on the cruise, but you got COVID. What would a cruise be without, communicable disease?
Exactly. I mean, you got to get your souvenirs from the.
Right.
At least it wasn't norovirus.
Legionnaire's disease, right?
Yeah, I don't want to be crapping for the next week. That wouldn't be
right.
Fun.
Yeah.
It might be a good weight loss plan after all that food we ate on the boat. But my
a herp trip.
Yeah, right. Did
you hear Eric talking about that?
Which one?
Did you hear Eric talking about that?
About your weight loss plan for the
that he and Dory had gone to the shore, and at some point they reach a point in the middle of the day where he's like, "Oh, I'm kind of hungry," and she's like, "We haven't eaten anything all day," and he's like, "Oh, well, I'm just not used to it."
I'm used to living without food. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, anytime we're out, and Heidi has to remind me, we probably should eat. Is there something we can eat? I'm like, oh yeah, I guess we need to eat. Yeah, good point. Yeah. But there was some good barbecue down there in Florida. We had some good stuff. Yeah, it was nice. So yeah, well, I know your experience with Florida wasn't great, but maybe if we go down to Miami or something, it wouldn't be too bad to hit the Everglades, and that was a fun trip. I still, be a great.
I might have to. It's one of those things where it just feels like going into the belly of the beast, even more so than where we've been. But that might be wrong. Where it's one of these where I'm like conceiving of it that way, and it's actually not relative to. We've already seen some stuff, so maybe I have it backwards in my mind. That's entirely possible. So.
Yeah, well, and I mean, national parks tend to be a little bit better to be in. I don't know. It seems a little safer to some extent. You have in the back of your mind, at least there's somebody kind of patrolling, and you're not going to have a ton of illicit activity if you've got.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. Even national park versus state park versus like. State managed area. I think that is a tiered system relative to intervention and what other visitors are doing. Probably.
Yeah, that's for sure. But like I said, the people I met out there and the experiences we had were really great. It was really a fun time. Okay. So, yeah. Well, and I guess that kind of leads into our discussion a bit. But I don't know. Do you have anything you've exciting happening in the reptile world and in your world, I guess?
Now we'll see. I got tomorrow / this weekend. We'll see if I can do it. I won't bring it up until we'll see how it goes.
Okay. Sounds good.
But we'll see how that plays out. Just in terms of your stuff, though, I know, certainly it's not a mischaracterization. I don't know if it's a misquote or whatever, but Phil was like unbelievably impressed with the amount of herps you had managed to kick out of the dirt on your trip. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exciting. Yeah. I don't know what lined up or if that's a typical night in the Everglades. I don't know.
It doesn't sound like it.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like
something went right. Because I was thinking, July's not going to be the greatest time to be out there herping, but it turned out to be really nice. And the weather was great. I mean, I think it might have sprinkled on us a little bit, but not a torrential rain or anything. It was hot, but it wasn't like unbearable by any stretch, especially you can get back in the car and turn the AC on, so
right.
Yeah. The most frustrating thing is at night when it starts to cool down a bit and then it starts to fog up your windows.
I was just going to ask you when you mentioned cooling down the car, I was going, I don't know, man. I remember being at Mission Beach, getting in the car, and having and the whole thing, and now you're not going anywhere. It's all fogged out.
Oh yeah. And it's like, what do you do? Like you turn on the AC, put that on the window and that makes it worse. Or it's on the outside. So you got your windshield wipers going and you have to have those going constantly. Yeah. I had the same thing in the tropics in Australia as well as down in Southern Florida. But I think we ended up putting on the heat and then that cleared it up and fixed it. Okay. But then we got the heat up to like 78 or something. We're like, okay, well, this isn't great either, but oh well, we can at least see out the windshield, So.
I guess that's important.
Yeah, I need a good formula for getting rid of that. I guess we need to talk to our tropical friends because that's not a problem in Utah and in Colorado, right? Good times, but. All right. Well, I think my season's, I think I do have some eggs still going. I've got some leaf-tail gecko eggs that I got. That reminds me, I need to go see if she's laying more because it's about a month since she laid those. So they kind of tend to go about a month apart. So I'll have to see if she may have laid some more. But it's getting hot out there. I probably need to take her down into the basement in this room and keep the leaf tails down here, especially after seeing them in Australia and having them be like
how cool it was.
It's crazy. And I got four new very large cages. Well, I guess I can't say very large, but they're good size upgrades for a lot of my pythons. So I put some womas in some larger enclosures and some jungles and inlands. So moving everybody up and moving some of the juveniles into larger caging and stuff. So that's nice. And got rid of a bunch of stuff that wasn't really being used and moved out a couple troughs that I had ackies in and that kind of thing. So
I know all about that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Did you on those things in the larger cages, are you keeping them paired up? What's your approach? Or are those
for the womas, I've got them individually because I want to.
Is that an issue? Just the way they are.
I haven't had problems. I've kept those together year round for the most part. Maybe other than taking them out when the female's gravid, but I've kept them together and they seem to be fine. Okay. It's just easier for feeding and things like that. Yeah, and the males I've got are a little bit smaller anyway. So, the smaller caging isn't as bad in my mind for the males as it is for the females. And so, and then I did these like false burrow things I made for the new cages. So it's
the termite things and all.
Yeah. So I've got like a little fake termite mound and then a hole and then, a tube that goes into the hide box. I don't know if they found their way in there yet. I almost want to like stick their head.
Right.
Go in there. So they've just been hanging out on top of it. I'm like, no, you're supposed to go in and see if it's suitable.
I bet they have, I think you were the one who mentioned, right. The whole thing that there had been a study of, they put a camera on like a little lab mouse cage or whatever, and that they then recorded it and that they circled the thing 1,000 times over the course of the night or whatever. It's entirely, maybe you just need to put a camera on there and during the day, they're just sitting on top of it, but they've actually, checked it out. So
I guess the fact that they're sitting on top of it maybe means that they don't want to go inside. I don't know. It's like,
who knows, right?
You not want to, Is there something wrong with it, or did I mess it up somehow? Like,
they don't want to get bit by termites.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so realistic looking. I noticed some big cracks, and I'd already painted it and stuff. I'm like, oh well, it's not going to be. I mean, if it breaks up, I can just put a little patch on there or something.
Right.
Take it out and paint it again or something. But yeah, it's not my finest work. It's more like get it done. And I messed it up on the first coat of. I used that hydraulic cement that our buddy out in Pennsylvania recommended. Robert, yeah, thank you. And that he uses for his caging, and it works like a charm if you read the instructions correctly. I was adding 3 parts water and 1 part cement instead of 3 parts cement to 1 part water.
Nice.
And so, yeah,
beautiful.
It was not working well, and it was all flaking off. I'm like, what did I? Oh yeah, duh, I'm an idiot, I'm like, this stuff is going to last me forever. I don't have to use hardly any of it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I had to crack it all off and get it all off and then redo it. And it worked much better the second time. But wasting all that time doing the first coat that didn't work was a little frustrating. So read the instructions, kids. So yeah, but it's nice to see them in these larger enclosures, and hopefully things will go smoothly. Cool. But the other thing, I put in a pair of inlands, and they start combating, and I'm like, what is going on? Because that happened to me last year, and this was another a different young set of female that I've been raising.
Oh, a different female. Okay.
And it's so now I've got another. So now I have 3 males and 3 females. Instead.
You're really going to have to go after the breeder that you got those from. Oh wait.
Smack myself and and inlands are so easy to sex, so I don't know how I got that wrong. You know what I mean?
That's almost like it's like you put it in this tub instead of this tub. You know what I mean? Like you didn't. That sort of thing. Yeah,
had some mislabeling or it was weird. So weird to have 2. I don't know. You can pop an inland blindfolded and half dead or something. They're easy, one-handed with your eyes closed. But anyway, I guess someday I'll learn to do it right. But for now, what do you do?
Right. Well, that's a bummer. But still 3-3, that's not too bad then.
Yeah. I mean, that works. And, I don't know if I want to produce 4 clutches of inlands a year and and where I missed this year's. And hopefully these new cages will mean, for better breeding for these females as well. So that's the idea. I'm excited to see what the future holds. Hopefully this will help a little bit. But. These
are first generation ones that you produce?
Yeah.
First generation with you, at least?
Yeah.
Okay.
The ones that I produced from the ones that I imported from Europe. And then, so I guess they're F2, the babies are F2s. So these, F2s. Okay. And I'm holding back 1 or 2 F2s is all. So I don't know. And now I don't even know if I need to hold back another male because I've got 3 males. Right? Yeah, but he's nice looking. So hopefully he'll turn out really. Yeah, I can replace another one with him or something. But they're cool snakes. I'm really excited. They're all doing well now. I had a couple that were kind of picky feeders, and then all of a sudden they just took off and they're just pounding food. So nice. They're fun snakes for sure. But I don't know. Is it time to fight?
I guess.
Should we
time to flip a coin anyway? Hey.
Yeah, exactly. So today we're gonna kind of discuss the pros and cons, however you want to look at it, of kind of the idea of iNaturalist versus Herp Mapper. Kind of the more open access, pin, gives you an exact location of where something was seen versus a more nebulous, like county, it was seen in this county approach, and harder to identify the exact spot. So we'll talk about the good and the bad and the ugly of those kind of things. So
absolutely.
So I guess we'll flip the coin to see who kind of goes.
You get one team or the other.
Yeah, the iNat or Herp Mapper. So you want to call it
tails?
It is tails. That's 2 in a row, Rob. What are you doing here?
I know. I'm cheating the system.
All right.
I got I got Ruby going, the Ruby equivalent going. So I muted myself, but
your own Ruby.
Yeah. So I will take the contrarian. I will defend iNaturalist. I know Herp Mapper. I know Mike's involved. Ton of great stuff. I really like the ideology, all that. But I think that iNat gets a bad rap. So I'm happy to take that.
Okay. And I know that you've done a ton of research, so I think I'm really excited to hear what you have to say on these things. This will be good. So do you want to chuck me, or do you want to go first?
I am happy to go first.
Okay. All right. The anti-chuck.
On this one, because I think the fundamental thing that I want to say is when the post that started sort of prompted this question, and then actually on NPR, I think that same one that I referenced, Owen and Eric, and I actually was really happy with the conversation that they had. I don't think they hit all the points that sort of are in my mind, and I know you have to mine too, but I actually thought they did really well. And as ever, this shouldn't be a surprise. The man with the words of wisdom, Owen, and I are aligned on this one. Which is always a great sign. If Owen and I are aligned, I feel really confident about the spot we're in. The fundamental thing that struck me the wrong way about the Instagram post that kind of prompted that conversation and the conversation we're having now was just sort of the self-righteous straw man argument that often comes out, even in just general scientific discourse, where people will say, essentially, if this straw man person X is given any modicum of information, then they will go out and completely pillage the habitat. They'll spend hours, days, weeks, months taking every animal out of the habitat, regardless of the time, effort, expenditure, their capacity to sell, I guess, illegal animals, all these things, that's meaningless. They will go and personally make it their mission, based on your pin, to go pillage that habitat. I posit that person to the extent they exist, which I would sort of push back on, exists at a much lower rate than is commonly framed, right? A lot of scientific discourse is presented as, we can't tell those herpers because they're going to come out and strip the land clean and salt the earth. That's sort of the messaging that's put out. And that's the messaging that I saw in that Instagram post, right? And I just find it disingenuous that the person would be, were it not for your pin, they would be at home twiddling their thumbs. But because there was the pin, they were going to go out and spend a year collecting every animal out of that habitat, no matter what the cost or their capacity to sell it. I just think that's disingenuous. And fundamentally, I think it's, as I say, a straw man argument that in reality is dissatisfied with property development, and other sort of all these other ancillary things that are a lot harder to blame than the imaginary straw man who's out to illegally collect populations out of existence.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree that, that if somebody is in the business of illegally collecting and selling, rare or
endangered or other or illegal animals that they probably would look on Google Earth. Yeah. And even if they went on Herp Mapper and found the county record, they would probably, again, go to Google Earth, go to the source material, go to books from, that were published yesterday, last year, or 100 years ago, right? We were talking about the Handbook of Snakes, right? And in there's explicit information on that stuff. Like, if someone's industrious enough to spend a year collecting over a population, they probably won't be thwarted by you being the secret keeper of that population.
Right.
But it's just, I say that somewhat in jest because I think so much, maybe the thing that really offends me is sort of the self-righteousness of saying, I'm the sole person, I am the keeper of this lore, of this knowledge of, this snake is in this place. And I just am offended by the thought process there of saying, like, really, you're so bold as to think you're the only person who could think that animal would exist there based on the whole capacity human knowledge that we have. I think it just fundamentally offends me. And again, maybe I read too much into it, but that's what I read. When I see something like that, it's like, know what? You're right, dude. You're the only person who ever considered that animal might be there. You're the only person who ever put in any work to identify that could happen. That really gets my goat. And maybe it's because both you and I were so into the research aspect of it that it's like, it's a fundamental, I take that as a fundamental call out to me that, hey, Rob, you couldn't find this place. You wouldn't be able to find it on your own. It's only my pin, or more accurately, just the pin of a random birder who doesn't care, or a person, a civilian walking about, who puts up the picture or whatever. And, if you didn't have that civilian's post, you couldn't figure it out. And that's how I take it. Whether that's how it's intended is probably not. I'm probably being cynical, but that's how I take it.
Yeah. Well, and as we all know, that no illegal activity has occurred before iNaturalist came into existence.
Absolutely not.
Nobody's been collecting illegally or selling illegally. Now, I do think that there is a bit of a transition, because of the captive breeding market and things like that the demand for wild caught, especially American or U.S. wild caught animals, has gone down from what it was in the past. I mean, you read Caulfield and he's out there collecting everything,
absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think that was just kind of the way things were done. And we see a lot of the kind of importers and they also have native species. And I think a lot of that, especially like the commonly, back in the day, the only way to get a corn snake was to collect it. Right. Nowadays there's a million and, different more.
Absolutely.
You could get a corn snake to look like anything you want, so there's no reason to go out and collect a corn snake because you can buy one for $20 to $50 at a reptile show, especially if the person's desperate to sell, you can get them for free in some cases. So I don't think that's, the pressure to collect is as much as it was in the past. Now, there may be some species that doesn't apply to, but I do think that the number of people out there collecting is probably much less than it has been. Now, we do know of, we've seen people that are out there just kind of indiscriminately collecting, those folks in Texas that kind of rubbed us the wrong way, And so I think it still happens, but to think that they need iNat to go out there and find those things. Usually the people who are doing that are probably pretty good herpers, or they're not going to be very successful at
right. They're just wasting their time. Yeah. Exactly. They're not making money. They're losing money. Yeah. Right. That's the point on the corn snakes, right? And first, I do want to acknowledge your point relative to the Caulfield story and all this stuff. I think other than like sort of incidental or accidental clutches of offspring or whatever, maybe they hatch and maybe they start the babies well and all this stuff, the previous knowledge, right, wasn't there to make those animals to then have something to trade, right? Yeah. It sort of reminds me, even in the zoo context, right, of, well, he's going out there to collect pine snakes in New Jersey because that's what he can collect to then trade for rattlesnakes. So the Staten Island Zoo has the, premier world collection of rattlesnakes at the time. That's his currency. And I totally agree that that's just not where we're at this point.
Yeah. And some of the best herpers I know were also field collectors, and they would take their finds and sell them. And I mean, and the ones that I know of that have done illegal things that have gotten caught or something were the same way. Like they knew where to find these rare or endangered or, protected animals because they were really good herpers. And so they didn't need anybody to tell them where to go find these things. They were out there finding them in the wild in numbers. And so they're like, this can support a little bit of collection, and they're paving over that habitat over there. So, I don't know. I think that's kind of the idea that, to think that these people need iNat or anything else. Now, I would say maybe, in favor of Herp Mapper that, it does make it easier to find some of the, some maybe species that are locally abundant, but kind of widely distributed. I'd use the collared lizards as an example, the ones that we saw in southeastern Utah, where, we went through lots and lots of habitat that could have had collared lizards and we didn't see any, but in one couple mile stretch, we saw, what was it? 15, 20 of them. Yeah. There were a lot of collared lizards in this small little area. And, there's people that might go in there and say, oh, these are beautiful. I'm going to, collect a bunch of these or sell them to my friends, or, even if they're not selling them, if they're just giving them away, they're taking them out of the wild, and that could, if it wasn't a national park and the risk of the fines that are associated with that, and, I think that might be one of the big things is I don't know that we need to obscure things in national parks because of the extra layer of the rangers patrolling and people that are
and consequences. Yeah, absolutely.
Consequences. I think of that story that Dustin told us about the guy who grabbed picked up a price.
I got the price eye.
And then the field officer jumped out of the bushes basically and said, "Here's your ticket for $5,000. I mean, that's going to teach them a lesson pretty quick. I don't think it's going to collect that price eye, but just the fact that they messed with it and got caught doing it.
That's brutal.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
$5,000 fine is not fun. So, you need to pay attention to the rules and know the rules. And that's very important. So, and I think, I don't know, maybe this is a topic for another time. And I think we've discussed this topic, but pretty much like most people are going to maybe try to pose the snake or get it out where they can observe it, even if
this was a whole different
kind of worms. And so, is that detrimental to the animal if you're taking pictures for 10 minutes or 30 minutes or, is that snake going to be okay? And, are you paying, mind to the snakes? Is it getting overheated or, those kind of things, as long as you're careful and, not that I'm suggesting you should go do illegal activity. It's just one of those things like in Australia, you're not allowed to touch the animals, but I see so many posts of people holding animals, taking pictures of animals when technically it's illegal and, nobody's going and finding them and putting them in jail or giving them fines or anything. It's just kind of one of those, if you get caught doing it, you're in big trouble, but everybody does it. It's kind of a weird thing. Anyway, we'll save that for another day. But I do think, those locally abundant but dispersed populations might be potentially
a little vulnerable to that. And I can see that. Certainly, even thinking in that. So what I wanted to say, two quick things, right? We'll have to say, I mostly will table this, but with the Sonata we had seen on the most recent trip, then when Brandon had posted that, there was someone who had gone out with Jeff Lamb earlier that day that reached out to Brandon and said, "Hey, where did you go?" Because I think I may have seen that exact one, and he had flipped that one and another under the same rock, ostensibly several hours earlier or whatever it would be. And that was, again, the one that was then, it crawled out right in front of me. So it's possible, as a possible negative to that interaction that he had was quite possibly that had disturbed it from where it otherwise would have been, such that it was then out on the crawl in that middle of the day. Or maybe just the temps and conditions were such that it would have done that anyway. No way to say, right?
Was it the same day?
Yeah.
And it was the same spot?
Same spot, same day. He was even maybe, "Hey, was this you?" And we couldn't quite remember. There were very few people there, but it was was that who was? And it didn't sound like it was almost it was not enough communication to really validate it one way or another. And I didn't even see the other photos or understand or whatever, but that was the suggestion that evening was "Hey, I think I saw that same one. I think I flipped that same thing a couple hours before you had seen it or whatever." So it is an interesting idea, right? One way or the other. I did want to follow up and reiterate the point that you had made, right? And actually highlight. So in the Michael Smith and Clint King book, Herping Texas, highly recommend. A lot of great narrative, basically working east to west across the different bioregions in Texas, just with narrative stories of different places. They kind of lay out in the frontispiece of it their ideology around speaking in detail to the places that they went. And it's sort of a tiered system of in national parks and state parks that are under heavy scrutiny and where animals are really protected. They felt pretty free to specifically identify, "Hey, Lost Mine Trail, Big Bend National Park. That is a heavily protected, very monitored area." They're happy to, that also is very easy to find. It's one of the top 2 or 3, if not the most popular hike that you could take in Big Bend. this is a trail that sees a ton of activity. There's another one, the river walk through Austin or whatever, and they're seeing black-necked garter snakes and all this stuff. It's like, this is a trail that sees tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people a year. Like, that's not my, my own little secret, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the fact that you would see this animal there, maybe not, but I'm sure that incidentally they're seen all the time. So like, that's really not that's not the spot that needs protection. And that's sort of how the book addresses it, of saying those places we feel confident to share and give insight and try and teach people stuff, right?
Yeah.
If it's private land, then they would kind of generally describe it, but with some level of specificity, knowing that you can't go there, right? Particularly in Texas. It's not like you're going to be wandering about, someone's private land, even if you did know, it's west of X river in Y county, right? Mm-hmm. No, you're not. That doesn't make it. It's as inaccessible as if it was on the moon, basically. Save for, if you have a death wish or something. When they're talking about road cruising public spaces that are, so obviously freely accessible, that still exist at this point as prime habitat, then it's much more vague. It's like a dirt road in Y County. And I think that's fair. The last categorization, and I think a lot of this sort of drama and debate comes down to this issue, right? It's not actually herpers. It's the things that populations have to deal with in terms of development and all those things, is saying like, he goes into great anytime when I'm reading the book and I'm getting into a chapter and he goes into great specificity. It's the north end of the pond on this college campus and the crayfish snakes are there and I'm amidst the reeds and all this. I know that story is going to end with him saying, and 10 years ago, they bulldozed that and decided that instead it should be the atrium, I think in this case, they were just like, they didn't like the look or the presentation of those reeds that fostered that habitat. So they stripped it out. Now it's, Kentucky blue, instead or whatever. And it's like, so where the habitat no longer exists so that literally they can speak to it in full detail, fully sharing knowledge about sort of what makes good habitat, without actually giving you anything of a roadmap, because that literally no longer exists as viable habitat. That's probably the ideal circumstance to be so open. So kind of either national park, a super popular trail in a national park, or that doesn't even exist. Those can both be great teaching tools without being, here's a roadmap to go catch yourself a crayfish snake.
Yeah. And that's, I guess in regards to like development and paving over habitat and things, it's almost to the point where, if you've been herping long enough or, know enough spots or whatever, you see kind of them decline over time regardless. We look at that Highway 91 in the southwest corner of Utah where, you used to go out there and see a bunch of different snakes, and then they rerouted traffic through there. Now there's just a ton of cars that are going down there. So most of the stuff you see is, dead on the road, and it's so frustrating. But, if you share that spot, maybe that means more herpers are out there, or if they know pins are out there, maybe they're out there looking and they're getting to the snakes before they're getting hit by
getting
cars.
Snakes off the road. It actually might have a
might be a good
effect.
thing, So, and somebody like we had, my brain is fried, but the spotted leaf nose snake out there.
Absolutely, which is wild. That's that habits. I can't understand how all of those folks down there, put so much time into it. That road is brutal. That road is brutal. Like we've seen it. We've found probably done pretty well, actually, relatively on it in terms of finding live animals, getting them off the road, seeing cool stuff, all that stuff. But like, if you follow Chris Allen Jensen's iNat, and maybe he just only posts when he finds dead reptiles, but holy moly, man, his ratio of the number of dead reptiles that he posts on iNat, I don't know if I'd have the stomach to do it.
Yeah, it's hard. And St. George is one of the fastest growing cities. Shane Madsen is the one I was thinking of. I was trying to, sorry, Shane. But yeah, we had him on the show a couple episodes ago. But yeah,
really great
guy. But that's, I think, sharing those spots or sharing places that are going to be a city soon, are not the worst things in the world. And I mean, people might as well enjoy them before they are gone, and there's other spots that everybody thinks are secrets, but everybody knows about them. Anybody that's connected in the herping world probably knows these spots if they're going to a specific area.
So I have something here, right? And it actually cuts a couple different ways. So I think it could prompt something interesting. Is the thing that jumps to my mind out of that is Alterna in West Texas, right? Yeah. So that amongst the Alterna community, there's literally the animals are defined by the road cuts that they come from. So the name of these captive lineages directs you if you put in the time and effort and work. And some of them, it's a little fuzzy. Like, so Big Hill from River Road, the old school River Road stuff that kind of post-dates when it became legal to road cruise. Before you couldn't road cruise, you had to walk it, was really the 1987 to the mid-90s. Is going to be sort of the epicenter of when the River Road, the road that goes along the Rio Grande below Big Bend State Park, was a thing, right? That was kind of the epicenter of collecting at that location. Yeah. And basically all of those things would be there aren't distinct cuts in the same way or necessarily as clearly. And I think some of that is also that they would just be actively out on the road as opposed to being walked up based on, as I say, how people were operating at that time, where the animals were, legality, all this stuff. It would be, I'm 3 miles west of Big Hill. Well, when they say Big Hill, what they mean is Santana Mesa. But if you don't know, then it's just like, what the heck is Big Hill, right? That's not that useful because it's not defined as that. That's the herp term for Santana Mesa, which is actually, you remember that giant boulder? I call it giant. I don't know what it was, the size of a sedan. That had come off of, that's where it had come off of. Okay. And when it slid out down on the road. Yeah, makes sense. We had avoided in the thunderstorm.
That is a big hill, to be fair.
It is a big hill. And it lost a sedan-sized chunk of rock.
Yeah. I'm glad we weren't in that area at the time.
Absolutely. I'm glad we had turned, had been like, let's go back. It's
kind of eerie weaving around that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of those records would be 3 miles west of Big Hill, which even then is a little obfuscated because it's not like the hill. There's just more gradation to it because it's not a singular point. That's the thing itself is a quarter mile long or whatever, half a mile long. Yeah. So what does that really mean? And it probably means something different to each person and all this different stuff. But the point would be that if they're talking about River Road or Alterna generally and all this different stuff, we're talking about public road access that's probably, I forget the number, but again, never forgetting the key lesson that saying giving a figure with confidence makes it true. 90, it's something like 98% of Texas is private land. Yeah. So in that context, right, taken the same way, even if not more extreme, if it's not universally or equally distributed, is that Alterna habitat, the vast majority of that is either in Mexico or on private land in Texas. So not legally collectible, on any of that. So saying like, the one that happened to be out on the road or on a road cut where they just decided we're going to put the road here, even though we're Texas, we don't respect terrain as a thing. Yeah. We're just going to plow through it. Hey, great for them because they're just, making those openings to subsurface level habitat and things, and that's how we see stuff on those road cuts. Realistically, the damage to an Alterna population that could be done by those collections is so minuscule because you're talking about literally ancillary animals that are going to try and get hit by a car anyway, or whatever. Whereas 98% of it is protected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a great example of how certain species are not impacted by giving away exact locations. Because that's a great example of that with the gray banded king snakes.
And they're like darn near impossible to find. And even knowing the spots doesn't solve your problem. Invariably, why are gray bands popular? It's because they're like the
Difficult
least
to
common
find.
thing to find, even if you're at the spot where the exact spot they come from, even
Right.
compared to other things that'll come out to that same spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the appeal, is that you could go out there every night and you might not see any.
Mhm.
And even if seriously, if you did it all summer, maybe if you saw 3 to 5, you're probably doing really good.
That's a good year. Yeah. Right. Yeah. You might go back a dozen times to try to find your one, and other times.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
some of those, the densities are so low that it really does seem like that, where people are putting in one night. I mean, you could get lucky in 15 minutes. Chris Montross, right, had gone out there and, Chris Payne Shop, right, on his first trip to West Texas, had gone out there. And, he went out there with his buddy, Dan Lassiter. You're infecting me here. John Lassiter. John and Chris went out there. And I think it took John, like the rest of us, countless trips, whatever it would be. Oh, I looked all these many nights to try and find one. And, to no avail. Chris Paint Shop goes out there, and within 15 minutes, it's, oh, there's one, this sort of deal. So that invariably can happen for folks. But going to that same spot, it'll come off or it won't. It's just so arbitrary. It reminds me of the Owen Pelly pipe. It's like, if you look on Atlas, the Living Australia, again, ignoring that, I think all the taxonomic changes have caused those records to be a little less visible than they were when we went 5 years ago, because just the number that are on the site are way lower, and I assume that's why, even including sort of historic records and things. The point is, it's publicly accessible stone country in Kakadu National Park. There's not that much of it. That's where you have to go. Right. Okay. Good luck. Pack a lunch.
I think
pack a lunch in a sleeping bag.
a lot of the records too, I mean, kind of give a distorted thing, and they actually point you to the more heavily trafficked areas anyway, because if you're going to go by, I'm going to go by the pins that, go specifically to those areas, you're going to go to where a bunch of people already have been, or, where a car hit a snake and you're looking at Chris's records or something, you might be going to where a DOR was. But I mean, those can be really effective places to look. I mean, if there's DORs, that means they can
cut either way, right? So remember when we went to San Diego for the first time together, the first place we went, because Eric's flight was coming in later, or either Eric or Tom's flight was coming in, however it's situated, right, or both of them, or whatever, was coming in later. I had found this spot on iNaturalist that wound up being with various a handful of records of various things, but it was the San Diego Dog Park. Yeah. And so the answer is that there's just thousands of people there every day, and they kicked up a few snakes out of the dirt, right? As opposed to a place that is off the beaten track, that same number of records would mean a wholly different thing. Right.
And their dog's looking at something or sniffing at something, and that's a rattlesnake, get away. I better make this known so people know there's rattlesnakes here or something. Yeah. Or they call the wildlife officers and say, hey, come remove this thing from the dog park. It's threatening our puppies. I think that's one caution of using iNaturalist, is that you're in those kind of areas when you're following those pins a lot of times. And I mean, a lot of the habit, like in Texas, it's all private land. So you're not going to have a ton of pins unless you have somebody who's like, oh, I'm going to record whatever's on my property, and they go around their acreage and record pins on their own property. You're not going to get in there and herp there. You're just going to know, okay, they exist in this area. So, it can be helpful from that idea. And I mean, same kind of idea with the herp mapper. If you have an idea of which county they're found in, and you can, say, oh, well, there's a state park here. there's a great spot to start,
Right.
like go.
What's the habitat like? Can you look on Google Earth? Oh yeah. If you're looking on iNaturalist, I'm confident you understand that Google Earth exists.
Right.
So
right,
those two things are probably correlated.
It's just kind of the easier step above Google Earth because it gives you exactly where they have been observed, so makes it a little bit easier that way. But when we went to South Australia trying to find the carpet pythons, we had a bunch of records from ALA and things like that, iNat, and I mean, not a ton of records, but most of the records are from popular trails where people go, and they're more. Some of the ones out in the middle of nowhere may have been like some faunal survey that went over several years or
digging pits or
exactly. Mining or something, and so, we went out to where these pins were specifically identified and herped in the area and spent, miles and hours and saw no carpet pythons. You took that
whole population. Oh wait, you didn't see any. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So we knew exactly where to look, but did not have the luck. And I think that's, with reptiles, that's also the other side of the coin. I mean, one side is if you're going to the area and they're easy to find and you can catch them easily, then, there might be a problem. For the most part, they're not easy to find. They're not surface active very often. That's the downside of looking for pythons is they're very efficient and they don't need to move a lot. So, unless they're a small species like an Antaresia, you're probably not going to find them in numbers, except for some exceptions, maybe coastal carpets, in Brisbane area or something. They're all over the place, or Crotalus, certain Crotalus populations Absolutely. Are pretty thick. Western diamondbacks are not very difficult to find in the right area. And you're probably going to see a couple if you're looking in the right spot. But other things like, with that example of the spotted leaf nose snakes, in Southern California, where one trip I found 30 of them. And then subsequent trips to that same spot have yielded maybe one or two, total over several trips. So it's not a guarantee that just because where something is, they're going to be active and readily, findable, or B, you're missing, you're not having the luck of being there when they're crossing the road or whatever. Right. So, I don't think there's never a guarantee in a lot of these things, and I really think, the one of the best things about something like Herp Mapper is for the person themselves who are making the observations. It gives them a database of where they can keep their observations and have those records, that they can look back on and say, oh, where did I see this? Or, record their own things. So in one way it can help, more people, especially, I do think there is some benefit, scientifically or with some reservations, you know what I mean? Like you can see where things have been found, and you might extend a range map or things like that. That's very helpful. And things like Herp Mapper and iNaturalist definitely help you do that, especially if you're just doing a blob map, if you just want to get a general idea of where they are in the state or in the country or whatever. You can do that pretty well with Herp Mapper or iNat, and Herp Mapper will share those data if it's for a legitimate reason and things like that. So you can do get the things done you need to do scientifically, publishing on things or so that's very helpful, with the caveat that you're going off of people's observations who are limited to major thoroughfares, public lands, that kind of thing. Sure. So you're really not getting the whole picture on one hand. There's millions and millions of miles of area where you could search and find these things, but nobody's going there because it's inaccessible or it's private land. And so, that's kind of the other side of the coin, if you will. Yeah, absolutely. So that reminds me, get me at least back on track a little bit here. Fighting, people say I don't fight enough. Bring it on. So I did want to highlight, so another book to recommend would be Lost Frogs and Hot Snakes, Herpetologists' Tales from the Field.
edited by Martha Crump, came out this year. Really great book that I'm about halfway through at this point. And I was reading through.
What is it again? What's the name of it?
So it's Lost Frogs and Hot Snakes.
Okay.
Herpetologist Tales from the Field. So it's really good. So it's this edited volume where basically it's like a whole bunch of different herpetologists, and they're each, I think there's 50 of them in the book, and each author is submitting one 3 to 5 page paper detailing. And they fit, I think there's 4 or 5 different sort of categorizations of the stories, but they're kind of giving an overview of their history plus a good story, whatever that might look like. The second to most recent one that I read was by Susan Walls, Following the Mole, Paren Salamander, and Paren Trail. The Mole Salamander Trail. And the point that jumped out to me is that, so she was a postdoc, I think, at a university in Louisiana, and looking at the specimen, so super into ambystoma, right? So all the different mole salamanders that there are. And there's a whole bunch of, I think, marbled salamander specimens with a pin description, right? So this would predate a lot of the GIS stuff and all this, but with the description. And so her thought process was, wow, we have 300 pickled marbled salamanders that came from this spot. You know, I'm going to go out there and check that out in the when the pre-spring comes and see what that looks like. I must be able to find some. Well, she went to that site over several years and never saw any, because it's pretty clear that graduate student, PhD, whomever, had gone at that peak time of the year. So maybe the answer is with turtles or with salamanders or with whatever it might be. Yeah. That, like, literally they just pickled all of the adults of that population. So that, you know, so that kind of cuts both ways, right? It cuts both ways in the sense that it's saying on things that are more on a population of breeding marbled salamanders. Yeah. It's, or, you know, specific wood turtles, spot turtles, these sorts of things. It can make some sense to be really tight-lipped about, as you said, things that have a broad range but occur in specific places within that range, that those specific spots might be sensitive to overcollection, particularly at certain times of the year. Maybe my thing is being most, you know, I love all reptiles, all herps, right? Reptiles and amphibians. But, you know, except in goannas, I'm undoubtedly a snake guy, and maybe goannas just really remind me of snakes. So maybe that's part of it. But, you know, I guess I have to admit that maybe my perception is biased towards not sort of, you know, being a little less credulous around the feasibility of over collecting this stuff as someone out there looking for pine snakes in New Jersey or in Florida or whatever. And it's like, we got super lucky to find, we put in a ton of work and got super lucky to find a Florida pine snake, knowing exactly where they are and doing exactly what you're supposed to do. Finding one took a tremendous effort. New Jersey, I've tried even more and found even less. So, like, you know,
but wait, how many publications did they get from those 300 pickled salamanders?
0. No one did any work on them at all.
So
that's just, you know, just throwing that out there. So both recognizing that specific sites can be an issue. Also just saying, hey, maybe it's not always about trying to collect them to sell them. It's collecting them even with the best of intentions, maybe misguided, saying, hey, maybe you could, how many do you really need to pickle, right? You know, maybe 10 is enough. Maybe 20 is enough. 300 in one day seems excessive, but
300 total, that seems pretty insane. But I look back at a lot of Rick Shine, you know, reading his book, So Many Snakes, So Little Time. So Many Snakes, So Little Time. You know, reading a lot of his early publications, and a lot of kind of the breakthrough discoveries were based on pickled specimens, you know, so
gut studies, you know, or the gonadal, you know, stages and all these different things.
With the caveat of, you know, within reason, of course, you know, don't pickle a whole population if you're working on a study site. And I was always frustrated because being friends with Ben Morrill, he was in the biology department for his undergrad degree. And so he had connections with the Herp folks there. And so I got to look at some of their collections and go back and see some of the live studies they were doing. And they were doing a study on banded geckos. I'm like, oh, those are beautiful geckos. What happens to them at the end of the study? Oh, we have to euthanize all of them. I'm like, what? Why? Like, just let me take a few of them before you pickle them. Or, And they had a confiscation of some, in Ben's words, big bumpy skinks, and it was a shingleback and an alpine blue tongue, and they had them in horrible, like sitting in a crate, like box with no light and they just kind of were withering away. I'm like, are you kidding me? The freaking the time a $2,000 lizard languishing in a box because they're the herpetology department. I was really frustrated with that. The other thing that really got me was this is kind of an aside anyway, but one of the herp students, he had a bunch of pets, and Ben was taking care of his pets while he was away at a study site or whatever. Well, the guy got his degree, he finished his PhD and was going to move, and so he just took all his pets and pickled them. Like, what the heck? Like, I don't get that. And that's one of the reasons I thought I'm glad I didn't go into herpetology.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know if I could do it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I don't understand that. I mean, what value to science does a bunch of captive, held? I mean, they were wild caught at some point, but he'd had them in captivity for at least 4 or 5 years while he did his PhD. I just don't get that. What value to science do those have? But kind of crazy. Yeah, why not place them with somebody who's going to give them a good home? This is nuts.
When I had read that about the ambystoma, that it did remind me of Hank Moll. I don't know if you want to align or not, but in Stolen World, right? Going back to the story of the Price-eye that had been collected in the early 2000s, right? That were so those were study animals, so they had the nail polish on the rattles, where they're identifying which ones are which and all that. And the two kids that turned up with them at some pet store in North Carolina, South Carolina, something like that, and they get posted online or whatever, and that's notable. Maybe let them shed first. They certainly wish they would.
Heifer blue rattle.
Pretty much, right? Yeah. And that turned into a whole thing. Well, Hank's point, as he wrote to the person who had sort of orchestrated the confiscation or was involved or whatever, who was involved with the University of Arizona Museum or Arizona State, whatever it was, was, notably your collection contains 60 pickled Price-eye. Really, just sort of highlighting the disparity there of saying, like, the problem is this guy with 2 Price-eye saying, well, I understand our motivations are different. Sure. But you should look in the mirror a little bit and say, like, you have 60 of them dead in jars. Yeah. Like, right. I don't know.
And the fact that those mountain ranges, again, are very inaccessible. There's like
very
a
well
couple
protected,
roads
very well noted.
Very well noted. We're very well protected. And, probably more hit on the road by ranger vehicles than are, taken into captivity or whatever. So
it was actually
I think that's a fair point.
In the Herping Texas book, they were talking, there was a story about that where it wasn't a ranger, but it was Border Patrol. They let a Border Patrol pass them on the road down by Lajitas, and that Border Patrol agent hit a blonde Transpecos rat snake right in front of them.
Yeah.
They came, that was the only car. They let them pass them, and they go a quarter mile down the road, and there's a writhing blonde Transpecos rat snake.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like they don't give a crap. Like that one that we ran into with the prairie rattlesnake in front of his vehicle.
Yeah, he wanted to get out of there.
He's like, I'm out of here. I'm not sticking around if there's drive down the road. There's not going to be any down there. No, because they're all right here apparently. Yeah.
I'm just glad he didn't shoot us. So,
that's all right. Or the snake.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
I'm
was.
sure that was a bad day out for him. Bad night out.
Yeah, but, I don't know if I'd trade my life for seeing a prairie rattlesnake.
Well, that population, though.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, so let's see. Other points that I wanted to make, right? Mm-hmm. So, a couple factual things from my perspective would be saying, so iNat Herp Mapper is inherently obscured to the municipality level. So in the United States, that means county. I don't know really what it means in other countries. I'm sure it's hugely variable, right? What that would mean in Europe versus Australia versus wherever else, right? As we sort of alluded to previously, San Juan County, Utah is a giant county. Yeah. Whereas if you're on the East Coast, like it's much smaller. So presumably, if Herp Mapper, the function of obscured probably works less well on the East Coast than it does on the West Coast, where we have, in general, much larger counties. So inherently, that region is going to be a different size.
Even Texas, right? Like I was looking at the Herping Texas book, and it shows the counties, and there's a heck of a lot of counties in Texas compared to something like Utah, So saying
some of them are real small,
and
others, and a lot of those ones that are, I guess, here's another point that I wanted to raise. So thank you for that. Is that in general, counties that are smaller are going to be more densely populated and developed than counties that are larger. Mm-hmm. That's a fair rule, right? So, kind of drawing a dichotomy between Herp Mapper and iNat, if we're saying that, Herp Mapper is the best because it only says it's X county. If we're on the East Coast, that's highly developed anyway, or if we're in Florida, which I think the specific example would have been from, right? Like in the picture itself, it's like the intent of the image associated with the post was to make fun of the fact of, there are obscured dots in the ocean around this state park or whatever that's out on this peninsula.
Yeah.
And literally the entire rest of the image is development. Well, guess what? Herp Mapper telling you that it's in that county. I bet you would probably go check out that state park anyway. So, it's funny. They're obviously not in the ocean, and they're all surrounding this state park. Okay, yeah, fair enough. I mean, the same thing happens with San Francisco garter snakes. Mm-hmm. And I'm not that hesitant. Here's transitioning to another point. Is I'm not that hesitant to point out, where exactly San Francisco garter snakes are, because in some sense, all that's happening, if people aren't communicating online about it, is that we're gatekeeping local knowledge versus online knowledge. So we're saying the locals who have the capacity, much greater capacity, to actually go out and collect with or muck with the animals, they know they're there. It's only, me in Colorado, who's not in the Bay Area, that shouldn't know where they are. That's sort of the implication, because the state park website itself identifies that it is one of 2 or 3 publicly accessible habitat spots for this garter snake. Mm-hmm. So, like, the only person being gatekept, the only person who isn't getting this information is the person who's not the threat. And that's the part that sort of drives me nuts. Is it's like, if there's someone out there who's going to commit what's been a federal crime since the late 60s, early 1970s to touch, let alone take, a San Francisco garter snake, the only person that's being dissuaded or not informed from that is someone who hasn't gone to the park, where there's an entire, there's literally a billboard spread that says right here is where they live.
Yeah.
Literally, it's on and we're talking about something that's like 300 feet of accessible habitat along this marsh. There's literally a sign right there that says this is where they are.
Yeah.
But only if you go do you see that.
I will say too, though, if you're from a different state and your intent is to illegally collect, it's going to be a lot harder to prosecute you if you're half a country away. If you're on the East Coast or something, they're going to have to expend substantial.
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely, and even just get buy-in from local. Practically speaking, right? It's more difficult. That being said, if it's a federally protected species like the San Francisco garter snake, subspecies, then like
they'll go
it's
after
notable.
you.
Right. Supposedly they exist in captivity in the United States. I have no even secondhand knowledge of that. It's all like, third hand, my uncle's brother's knows a guy, sort of thing or whatever. And it's like, I don't even know that I find that credible, to be honest. But what I can tell you is that if you go to Europe, they're readily accessible. I went to the Haus des Murs in Vienna, and the only one I have seen in life, because Lucas was down the trail and when he half saw one, turns out garter snakes. The thing I realized, you learn so much as you go through the process. It's like, garter snakes, at least in my experience, absent flipping them, they're a flush and grab sort of species, which is pretty tough when you're in a heavily monitored state park with something that it's a federal crime to touch.
Yeah.
That's a really tricky thing to get to see, let alone get a good picture of. The only ones I've seen in life I saw in Vienna in a zoo, and they're in private hands in Europe and whatever, and they're not special, quote, not special.
Yeah. Yeah. They're commonly bred and available. It's
because to your point, they were sent out, they've been collected over the last 60 years where it's been illegal to do so. And they went to Germany and Austria and wherever, and they're garter snakes. So, they breed easily. The reason that they're actually, why are they rare now? Why are they
because
endangered?
Of habitat destruction and limited space.
Exactly.
And because
they require fresh water right immediately inside of the ocean in the northern half of coastal California. The priciest real estate going. So
and that's to that point. I mean, if they would have collected from the other spots before they paved them over, I guess that's my contention with a lot of these. And this is kind of off topic, of course, but like Gila monsters in Utah, we can't keep Gila monsters in Utah because they range in Utah and they're hard to find, or they're threatened, or they're limited areas, but they're paving over their habitat in leaps and bounds. Why can't we go
on top of those mesas? I was just pointing that out to Nipper, that it's like, man, I bet it's a cool view, but that doesn't feel sustainable. It doesn't feel like I bet in 10 years that house isn't there.
That's true. It's another point of that. Yeah. And, but the same token, like they do that for desert tortoises. Like if a desert tortoise is displaced, they'll place it with a home that will give it a certain, requirement. Why can't they do the same thing with the Gila monsters if they're going to, pave over their habitat anyway? Well, first off, they're probably underground and hard to find, and so they don't even know they're there. They might find once they dig up their burrow or something. But it's just, I don't know. That really rubs me the wrong way. Is like, we're going to protect something into oblivion because eventually that prime real estate will be high enough price that we won't give a crap what's living there. We're going to pave over it regardless. So I do think things have changed a bit in the U.S. and like there is some, at least as evidenced by Lucas having a job. Is there?
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
They are setting aside things, but. Yeah. Australia
strip mine, again, you can run over anything and they'll, strip mine it to pull minerals to send to China, that's at some point here, we'll have to go to your favorite spot of WA and, check that out. But I've heard that some of those hikes are ruined because, look at the vista where they've strip mined away half of the hillside.
Yeah.
But if you were to move that WOMA from the bulldozer, you're the one.
You're a bad guy. Yep. Exactly. And, I guess in kind of the other side of that coin is the mines also put in really nice paved roads that you can go road cruise.
Make it easier to
herp.
A
lot of good stuff and find a lot of herps on those.
Although it also results in them getting crushed by road trains.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's as ever, right? It's a mixed bag.
Double-edged sword and mixed bag for sure. But that's I guess that's the way it goes. If you don't have accessibility, you're probably not going to get in there to herp. And if you do have accessibility, that means other vehicles do, and they're probably going to see some DORs. So, but at least on the mining roads, the traffic is much less, frequent and busy, aside from certain times of the day. Coming out of South Australia, we were coming out just at dusk, and man, the miners were moving. There were lots of cars on the road for a few hours there.
I've seen that too. We saw that when we went to sort of coastal central Queensland on our last trip. So we were up by Byfield, and we were there 2 or 3 nights, and they were sort of nondescript. Maybe it was, one, it was like torrentially raining, so that people weren't super out and about or whatever. But
Yeah.
the point was that it basically dead ends into this airbase. And one of those nights, then, this otherwise road where legitimately we didn't see a car either with us or against us the entire time over hours. Then we were doing it on a Saturday night, and each one of those airmen was blasting through at 35K over the speed limit, and whatever. And it was like, oh, it's over tonight. This, we did save a couple of things. Boyga Regularis, we did see a coastal, not on that main road and whatever, but like, I mean, to your point, right? When it's going, it can be worse than basically anything. But then there are most of the time, there's nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I think a lot of people may not post their finds, in certain areas where they're unknown or that might be more of a herp mapper type situation. If you're wanting to safeguard those observations, you're probably not going to post them on iNat. And so, the iNat records kind of maybe manipulated a little bit or biased towards that. And so that's another kind of downside of iNat, is that people who are out there herping, and, I'll see that a lot from my Utah friends, guys that I know have seen like 100, Mountain Kings or something, are not posting those on iNat or on Herp Mapper. They're keeping them for themselves, and that there's nothing wrong with that. That's their prerogative. That's fine, but there could be a lot of value in that. Hopefully they're keeping them somewhere, and someday that could be available if somebody was going to publish on the natural history of mountain king snakes in Utah or something. But, that just as an example, I'm not saying that needs to happen, or, that person needs to give up their locations.
Come out with it. Sure it up.
Yeah. That's kind of the, kind of, it's hard to say, hey, you have to do this, or, hey, this is important. And, but it could be, or it could not be, like, the marbled salamanders in the pickle jars. Maybe nobody does anything with them, and that was a complete waste. Or maybe somebody comes through and makes some huge discovery on marbled salamanders using those pickled specimens. It's really hard to predict, and say what's going to happen.
On the front end what'll happen.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're kind of, you're just sort of casting a lot on it, I think. Yeah. That does raise a good point, just for clarity around another point of offense in the post was sort of the suggestion that no science happens with iNat, that sort of the sole utility is negative. The pushback to that would be, we've heard at least 2 episodes of Herpological Highlights where the principal article that was discussed came utilizing citizen science data from iNaturalist. Yeah. So the first one was looking into sort of the regionality of the Bell's phase versus traditional lace monitor. That was a really good episode. I know you will have listened to. Yeah. And then in June, so I reached out to Tom Major about this, sort of talking through this stuff and whatever, and he had some interesting points, that we've mostly gone through. We could also, I'm sure we'll hit on here shortly. But the other one he reminded me, and I was like, wow, I can't believe I didn't remember that, because it was 5 or 6 weeks ago that they did an episode talking about evidence of nocturnal activity in natrix, grass snakes, that was all based on, a super wide-ranging species that has a great both latitudinal and longitudinal distribution. And they were able to look at that variance, look at the time of collection, the time of the photograph, look at the light conditions in visible in the photograph, and see like, oh yeah, at southern as you might guess, they're more likely to be nocturnal in the summer in southern latitudes than they are in northern latitude. This sort of, but just so the post
compiling the data and showing that through the data is very important to the scientific process. If you don't have the data,
the whole paper utilized data that was collected by people, recognizing the limitations some of which you've highlighted, right? Recognizing those limitations, that entire data set for that paper, for that piece of knowledge, again, probably confirming what we might suspect, right? What our intuition might be. But nevertheless, all of that came from citizen science data on iNaturalist. Yeah. So to the extent that the post said explicitly that no scientific material ever has come out of iNaturalist, That is fundamentally false. There are at least 2 herpetological highlights episodes strictly related to articles that solely came from iNaturalist.
Yeah.
So, not true. I know it's fun to be like someone we know who everything is 100% one thing, 0% the other, or vice versa.
Yeah. Never, always. Yeah.
Never and always. If you say never or always, you're almost certainly wrong.
You're always wrong. Yeah.
Well, almost
always. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, like we mentioned before, Herp Mapper will provide data for, scientifically
Absolutely.
sound.
So that's not so much a negative to Herp Mapper.
Yeah.
You grant that access to appropriate people. And as I know Mike, so love Mike. I love listening to Mike Bingleton. Great podcast. He's going on hiatus. Maybe Justin and I have some plans to compete at least in the gap. We'll see. We'll see what happens with that. But I think he does a great job, heavily involved with Herp Mapper. He highlighted on an episode where they talked about sort of the getting into Herp Mapper and why it exists and what they do and sort of their core tenets. He said that, he's had people suspect him of, oh, well, when you go herping someplace, you'll access our records or whatever. And he vehemently denied that and said, no, absolutely not. I'm not abusing, my place of privilege based on my involvement here. None of us do that. So
that's cool.
It's not disrespect to Herp Mapper. This is more to me highlighting that A, I like to fight straw men, and B, saying that I think it's just as ever, there's a far greater level of complexity than that sort of like, as I think I said to you when we first saw it, anyone who's unironically using the large brain, small brain meme, I probably disagree.
Yeah. Well, and I'm frankly working on a project now that I'm using both Herp Mapper and iNaturalist for different reasons. And they're very helpful in that objective. So, I think there's benefit and usefulness for both of those things. As long as they're correctly identified. There have been some instances where I'll go back and some of the records that are in iNat are misidentified animals or things like that. So, it's got its pros and cons for sure. But looks like Rob is frozen. Oh, I hear you.
Yeah, I'm here. Okay. I was just letting you go.
Okay. Gotcha. Your image is frozen on my screen, so I'm not seeing you move. But
yeah, it's frozen. Both of us are frozen on mine.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Hopefully we're all good. Maybe this is the universe telling me that I can stop rambling for a moment and save my enthusiasm for the weekend's venture and our next episode. But I think this has been really good. I mean, there's utility to both. That's again, we don't fight about things where there's no conversation to be had, but it's in the conversation, right? That hopefully there's utility. Yeah,
definitely. And I think this is a really important topic, and I agree. There's a lot of kind of shade thrown on iNat and some of the things associated with that, or Herp Mapper even, where I don't think it's warranted. And I think this was important to kind of discuss these issues and kind of counter some of those claims like we have. So very, very helpful and useful topic, in my opinion. So in my very biased opinion, but yeah, I appreciated your insights too. You had some really great points and of course we've talked about these offline as well. So yeah, it's really good to think about all the ins and outs and pros and cons of these things, and also recognizing their limitations. So I think we've hit on a lot of good things. If there's something we missed or something you want to add, feel free to contact us and come on the show. Happy to have some guests on to talk about this further. But yeah, interesting stuff. Well, I'm really curious to see that, read that book. I like those kind of books where they talk about their herping adventures, that kind of thing. That's really cool. So I'll have to check that out. But any other exciting things in the world of herpetoculture or herpetology you've run across? Oh, did you miss that? I just asked any new stuff in herp world that you're excited about.
Hold on.
Oh yeah. I let's see. I know I listened to the roundtable about the short-tailed pythons and Borneos and all that stuff. I'm not so much into that, but it was really great hearing Keith and Matt and Eric and Owen discuss kind of the history and all the fun stuff in the background of those different species, the big fat pythons of Southeast Asia. So that was really great, but really enjoy listening to those guys chat about them, even if I have no interest in keeping them. But they're beautiful snakes. I just don't think they fit well in my collection, this strategy or mindset. But I really appreciate those good looking snakes. I think I'm in line with Eric's view on those. But very cool episode of NPR. Yep. I listened to the one that you recommended with Daniel Natouche talking scrub pythons on Cush's Corner on that was a really interesting episode, listening to Daniel talk about kind of the wild scrubs and that kind of thing. So very cool episode of that Cush put out. So good stuff. Well, we might be done with this episode. I think Rob is having some sufficient technical difficulties, but so we will, I guess, we'll bow out of the show now and say thanks to Eric and Owen and the NPR umbrella, and we're grateful for their support and helping us publish this content. And hopefully you guys are enjoying it, and we'll catch you next time for another episode of Reptile Fight Club.